Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Eurocentric historians claim that Europe has produced what is by far the most advanced civilization on this planet in human history. This also has the implication that the rest of us are extremely inferior and backwards. The goal of this talk is to analyze and to counter this claim. This idea that Europe is advanced and developed while we are backwards leads us to try to think and act like Europeans in order to make progress. So debunking these stories of Western superiority will lead us to see the world differently and open up new possibilities for thought and action. One of the highly respected scholars of the 20th century, Max Weber, argued that everything good that we see in the world around us, science, reason, good governance, it comes from Europe. The rest of the world was in the Stone Ages, waiting for the Europeans to come and rescue them and teach them. Another popular historian writes that Europe rose because it had all the virtues: integrity, creativity, initiative, courage. And what about the rest of us? For 1,000 years we have been corrupt, lazy, dishonest, cowards. Ironically, what he says is that one of the key European virtues is a respect for property rights. Apparently they forgot that when they colonized the globe. Eric Jones goes through a long list of factors, searching for the secret of European success. He ends up with a weak and unconvincing explanation: geography, which does not stand up to scrutiny. Like the black cat in the dark room, the secret cannot be found, perhaps because it is not there. Jared Diamond desperately wants to find a non-racist explanation for the development of Europe. So he builds on Eric Jones and develops geography again as the reason for European success. But the structure remains the same, a new excuse, but the supremacy of Europe stands as an established fact. So this story has been repeated so often that we have absorbed it internally and learned to believe it. But if we just stand back and look at what is being said, it is so absurd that it becomes clear that it cannot be true. Can it really be that over 1,000 years, Europeans are the only ones who have rationality, creativity, morality, energy, and all other good things that we can name? The rest of the planet has all the opposite qualities. We are irrational, dogmatic, corrupt, lazy, despotic governments, and every bad quality you can think of. This is so ridiculous that to argue with it is to respect this thesis far beyond what it deserves. Europeans tell us a story of a rise due to reason, virtue, development, progress, advance on all frontiers of knowledge. What actually happened was conquest, loot, plunder, exploitation, enslavement, killing of millions, and domination. On the rest of the planet, civilization meant caring for the poor, protection for the weak, responsibility for the society. But the rise of Europe replaced these ideals with what the Vikings called the values: loot what you can, crush what resists, and call it strength and victory and advance in civilization. Basically, Darwin's law of survival of fittest became the new gospel. And by that logic, the most ruthless, the most violent becomes the most advanced. So European rise was not based on virtue and morality and reason. It was based on power and violence, killings, exploitation. And they rewrote the rules of what was to count as progress. So it's time to reject these values. It's time to remember that civilization means caring for each other. So we have to begin the analysis of history from a different perspective. So as we have said before, countering the Eurocentric narrative, rejecting the idea that Europe is the most advanced civilization, involves changing how we see the world and changing how we think and act. So in the counter narrative that we will develop, the alternative to the Eurocentric narrative, we will emphasize three factors that led to the dominance of Europe. And one of these factors is a comparative advantage in violence, which arose from continuous wars. Another was a moral re-engineering, where things that were regarded as vices and sins and evil and bad became in their eyes good and honorable. And then there was also financial re-engineering, which allowed them to invest huge amounts of money in killing, loot, rape and plunder. So Jeffrey Parker tells us something which is both simple to see and devastating to the idea of the superiority of European civilization. Europe's rise was born in blood. Centuries of constant war between European states made Europeans militarily very advanced. They developed new weapons, new strategies. They developed standing armies ready to fight at any time and all times. While other civilizations were building schools and temples and trading routes, Europe was perfecting the science of destruction. Parker calls it a military revolution, but it was really a long period of training in organized violence. So Europe's power emerged because they perfected the art of violence, killing and looting. Philip Huffman develops the thesis of Jeffrey, and he asks, why was Europe so obsessed with war? So he gives us a surprising answer, that the incentives for war within Europe were rather different from those elsewhere in the world. There was a tournament mindset where the winner takes all, and the loser often didn't lose very much. So there was motivation for continuous warfare. In other parts of the world, peace and harmony, balance, continuity, these were the prized ideals. But in Europe, conquest was the name of progress. And from this twisted tournament, a world-dominating military machine was born. Turning conquest, looting, exploitation, plunder into ideals required a change from Christian mindsets. For many centuries in Christian thought, greed was a vice. Wealth was spiritually dangerous. The love of money was the root of all evil. But capitalism flipped the script. Wealth became the proof of virtue. The pursuit of virtues was the greatest good. And Tawny has shown how greed was rebranded as industriousness, initiative, even godliness. So in this new moral order, accumulating wealth wasn't just permissible, it was actually a civic duty, a sign of sanctification. And this moral re-engineering was at the heart of capitalism, an insatiable thirst for power, profits, and pleasure. This is what led to the rise of Europe. Karl Polanyi has given us a deep analysis of the origins of capitalism. One element of this analysis is that labor markets are necessary for capitalism. Labor markets means that human lives can be bought and sold on the marketplace. But once people become commodities, and they are bought and sold like hot and cold, they are human resources, then there's a natural logic that comes into effect. When you can buy lives with money, money becomes more valuable than life. And if money is more valuable than human life, then it becomes the highest goal for us as individuals and for society as a whole. When everything is for sale, then there is no dignity, honor. Whatever gives you the most money, that is the most honorable, and that is the purpose of it. The purpose of our existence is to accumulate as much money as possible. This is at the heart of the European advance to global power. So the secret of European success, which so many authors have been searching for in vain, is a moral revolution. Once greed became a virtue and profits and plunder and power and pleasure became the goals of life, conquest became the source for acquiring these virtues. Instead of thinking about the death and destruction caused by wars, we started to calculate the profits. A civilization which does not believe in God and heaven will pursue the maximum amount of wealth on this earth. And this moral transformation which occurred in Europe is the unique feature of Europe, which distinguishes it from all other civilizations. So this is the key to the rise of Europe. When greed became a virtue and the pursuit of pleasure, power, plunder, as goes the proverb, all is fair in love and war. So there were no moral restraints in the pursuit of pleasure and power. So once this became the way of thinking, when money became the god, then the banking system emerged to support it. And when people reject God and heaven, then they try to build it on this planet. And how do you build it? By having lots and lots of money. So this change of moral compass, the worship of wealth, was the key feature which led to the rise of Europe. Soldiers and weapons were at the front lines of the empire. That was the face we saw. But behind them there were ideologues, dangerous philosophies, and financiers. John Locke, the so-called father of liberty, invested in a company that ran slave trade. Voltaire, again one of the famous Enlightenment philosophers, made money from investing in slavery. John Stuart Mill, who wrote passionately about freedom, worked for the East India Company and said that Indians aren't ready for liberty. These people, the philosophers and the financiers, they were part of the violence, and they found it necessary to justify it. And how did they do that? They tell them some very nice stories. They said that enslaving people is the way to turn them into Christians, and that conquest was civilizing people. When the money was coming in, it was easy to look the other way and to accept any kind of paltry excuse. The ledgers in the financial accounting were clean and white, and there was no blood on them. In all other civilizations, pursuit of wealth far beyond what you need has been considered a bad thing, evil, dangerous, harmful to the soul. If you have more than what you need, you should just give that to those who need it more than you. Life is not about money. Life is about learning knowledge of different kinds of things, how best to serve society, poetry, philosophy, character. lot of things which are worthy of spending our lives on, but not making of money. But once making of money became the goal of society, then a whole financial system grew up, which was made possible by the fact that this was the collective goal of society, unlike all other societies. So the financial system was based on violence. Slaves backed loans. People who were in debt went to prison. Counterfeiters of money were executed. And all of this kept the money flowing and the trust in the financial system intact. Roosevelt says that this financial system gave Britain the edge in war. It could borrow endlessly to fund conquest. The empire didn't march on soldiers, it marched on spreadsheets. And finance was what made the empire possible and hid the blood behind the books. So when we look deeply into the rise of Europe, and beyond the guns and the soldiers and the weapons, we find that accounting system, ledgers and quotas and profits on the books, and we look at the other side of those books, we find immeasurable horrors and atrocities. And the slave ship Rediker shows us that these were designed factories of terror. The whole system of how to hold slaves, how to punish, how to make sure that the cargo got to the destination and the spirits were broken and ready for acting as slaves, all of this was systematized. Similarly, Hochschild told us about how the regime of Leopold extracted maximum amount of rubber at the cost of millions of lives and the complete destruction of the Congolese culture and society. So if we step back for a little bit of perspective, the idea that we can fight wars for profit and make money from them and justify them on this basis, this only makes sense after a massive shift in morality which took place in Europe. So before capitalism, life was sacred. You couldn't put a price on the human life. But then thinkers like David Hume came along and said that we can calculate the value of a human life in dollars based on lifetime income. At that time, the people were horrified, but over time, this kind of thinking became accepted and normal. And that is the horror of capitalism. It quietly taught us to equate human lives with money. And even we are influenced by this way of thinking, and we think of our own value as according to the amount of salary we can make. So once you accept this logic, war is just a business opportunity. And that's what General Smedley Butler saw firsthand. And he called it a racket because wars are sold as being about honor and glory and dignity, but they're actually just all about making money for a few secret hands behind the scenes. So Bowman also shows how this logic worked to create the Holocaust. All little parts of the machine that ended up killing millions of Jews in horrific circumstances, they were all doing little parts of the job, and none of them felt they were responsible. They were acting on orders, or they were just units in a cog of a machine, and they did not see that they were part of this killing machine. So basically, the whole system is designed to turn people into the cogs of a machine which generates money at the end. Nobody feels responsible because they are all just pieces of a machine and standardized and replaceable parts. So they say that if I didn't do this, somebody else would. All wisdom traditions teach us that the greed for wealth hardens the heart and blinds the soul. In chasing worldly gain, we have turned against each other and against the earth, our God-given home, whose soil feeds us, whose waters quench us, and whose balance we were entrusted to protect. Schumpeter taught of the creative destruction that is part of capitalism, but the phrase has taken on a new meaning as armies destroy and corporations rebuild, and both sides earn profits on both ends. Today, wars are induced so that weapons maker can sell size to both parties. We have been trained to believe that money buys happiness, but this is a false promise. Chasing after wealth, we forget the real roots of happiness, a deep inner spiritual peace, contentment of the heart, social relationships. Insatiable greed is destroying our planet for profits and threatens the future of humanity. We have been schooled in the myths of modernity, the most powerful one being that there is no alternative. This system, this economy, this morality, this way of organizing life is the only way. Greed is human nature. Markets are natural and eternal. Capitalism is just, efficient, profitable. But that's not the truth. It's a story. It's a powerful myth. History teaches us that economies can change, moral values can change, and they have changed in front of us. The things we take for granted, money, work, power, success, these were all made by humans. They are social choices, and we can change these choices. The first step is to see the illusions, to realize that the system is causing massive damage. It wasn't here always, and it isn't here to stay. Cracks in the system are already showing and growing, and all we have to do is nurture them. It's part of the change. Even as the cracks in capitalism grow larger, something else is growing. Around the world, the people are building new ways to live, not based on profit or domination, but on care, community, respect for life. We see the rise of commons-based economics. Resources are shared, not hoarded. Work is being valued instead of paid for and priced. Indigenous wisdom from many forgotten traditions is offering powerful alternatives to the soul-destroying myths of capitalism. These aren't utopias. They are seeds for what can become the future. And they need nurturing and tending. Hope is not a mood, it is a decision, it is a practice, a way of seeing and acting. And we can create it together. So what can we do? We must resist the ideological pull of the consumer society. We reduce our engagement with capitalism, reduce our consumerism, reduce our producerism, reduce our labor, and we reconnect with each other, with the planet, and with the ideal values in our spirit and our soul. We live purposefully with intent. Every choice is an act of resistance, an act of rebuilding, and we organize. We are not alone. We start small, we look out for each other, and we build our communities. And most importantly, we are focused on the moment. Making a good choice is a success in itself. We are not outcome oriented. And this is what makes life rich and rewarding and worth living. Because the point is not about survival, it's about living with honor and living according to human values, regardless of whether we fight the good fight, regardless of whether we win or lose. We live in a world built on oppression, a world shaped by three Eurocentric pillars: the reversal of moral values, the worship of wealth, and the endless war of the powerful against the powerless. But Islam teaches us that the world was also always meant to be a place of trial, a furnace to forge human steel, a space where injustice reveals character, where corruption is resisted by truth, where the struggle becomes the path to meaning. This life is not about comfort, but about choosing. Will we side with the tyrants, or will we rise to resist them? It is in this struggle that we find the purpose of life and learn what it truly means to be human.